Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Reva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So where are we in our text?
We're starting chapter 9.
Chapter 9. You found it?
Yeah.
And what's the title of the chapter?
The Lamp of Meditation.
The Lamp of Meditation. Let's check it out.
Sanvadi Brahmavat Brahma Tatvopasyapi Muchyate Uttare Tapaniyetaha Shrutopasti Ranekadha. One may perchance obtain a thing by following a wrong line by mistake. So also, even by worshipping Brahman, one may get release, the desired goal. So various ways of worship are described in the Nrisimha Uttarapaniya Upanishad.
So the idea here is, for example, if you turn on your Google Maps or Waze to get to a certain location and you make a different turn than Google Davy tells you to do, you can still get there by another way. The idea, there's not only just one way to get from one place to another. Likewise, there are many, many paths up the mountain of truth. And we can take some circuitous side paths. I can remember when I was a boy, we had a ranch-style home with very long overhanging eaves. They were like 3 feet at least, maybe longer, I can't remember. And I can remember there was kind of a plant that was growing up the side of the building. It was going to grow towards the sun, and then it hit the eave, and then it went, and then up that way. It would not be denied. It was going to grow towards the light. So also is the human heart. We can get sidetracked. The ladies and I had been talking earlier last week about perhaps coming across a a teacher who has impurities. But if we keep on keeping on, we right ourselves, we end up taking a different path, we get there. Everybody comes home to God. When I was young, I thought the idea of a labyrinth was kind of stupid. I just didn't get it. So I've talked about this on other occasions. What's the difference between a labyrinth and a maze? Who can tell me?
With a labyrinth, you always get to the end.
You always get to the center, yeah.
Yeah.
With a maze, you can get lost and have dead ends. But what's interesting is if you walk a maze that's a nice, big, and complicated one. If you're here in the Bay Area, one of the nicest ones is up by Grace Cathedral. It's a copy of the maze that's there on the floor of Chartres Cathedral. And you can walk the labyrinth, and you can go all the very circuitous routes, and you end up in the center. But what's revealing is if you walk it with a friend. And if you start the journey a minute or so apart. So one person starts their journey through the labyrinth, and then the other person starts. And at certain times, you're on opposite sides of the labyrinth. At other times, you're both going in opposite directions. But the journey through the labyrinth always leads to the center. So frequently in our misunderstanding, we will compare ourselves to other people. Oh, so and so is more advanced than I am. Oh, that got in my way. I'm not gonna do well this life because of this problem or that problem. Anybody have those ideas? And what Vidyaranya is inviting us to understand is, in the end, you're not doing the sadhana. There's no person there doing the sadhana. That's an illusion. It's being done. Just like no one chooses to grow their hair. No one chooses to go through puberty. It just happens. So also, in the end, we can do nothing but sadhana. We really don't have a choice. It does take our personal effort, but we can't help ourselves. We just have to do it. So this part of the teaching is to give us faith and hope. Don't worry. All right, next verse.
Mani Pradipa Prabhayo Mani Buddhyabhi Dhavato Mithya Jnana Visheshepi Visheshortha Kriyaprati. A man sees a gleam of light emitted by a gem, and another sees a gleam of light coming from a lamp, and both imagining that they are gems run to get them. Though in both cases the notions are wrong, the results are different.
Yes. So the idea is the light is not really in the gem, and the results are different if you take the wrong path. But in the end, from the spiritual standpoint, it will right itself. Now, what he's talking about is we can get sidetracked. We were talking, the ladies and I, earlier about siddhis. Many people get all caught up in acquiring siddhis. Siddhis are not a mark of self-realization. We might be attracted to a particular teacher because of their fame or something like that. All sorts of ways in which we can get sidetracked. We get a different result for a time. But if we're sincere, the Guru will find us when we're ready. Going on.
दीपो पवरकस्यान्त वर्तते तत्प्रभा बहिः दृश्यते द्वार्यथान्यत्र तद्वद्दृष्टा मणे प्रभा. There is a lamp inside the house. Its light is visible from outside. Similarly, elsewhere, the light of a gem is seen from outside.
I'm not sure what he's driving at. Let's go on and see what his point is going on.
दूरे प्रभाद्वयं दृष्ट्वा मणिबुद्धयाभिधावतोः प्रभायां मणिबुद्ध्वस्तु मिथ्याज्ञानं द्वयोरपि. On seeing the two gleams at a distance, both the men took them for gems and ran after them. Their notions are equally wrong in that they took the gleams for gems.
So the gleams are not gems. But let's see what his point is. I'm still not quite sure what his point is. So let's keep reading.
न लभ्यते मणिदीप प्रभां प्रत्यभिधावता प्रभायां धावतावश्यं लभ्येतैव मणिर्मणेः. The man who ran for the gleam of the lamp did not find the gem, but the man who ran for the gleam of the gem got it.
So the idea is we want to make sure that in the spiritual life, we have as our goal something that is true and fruitful. So the goal of the spiritual life is not the improvement of our ego. It's not about developing more self-esteem. It's not about acquiring powers. It's not about having other people think we're very spiritual. What is the goal? The goal is the identification with Brahman. Come to realize that the self in me is Brahman. That's the proper goal of the spiritual life. Parvati and Kali teach yoga. I suspect you get many, many students who just want to improve their health. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. No blame, but that's not the goal of yoga in the end. Going on.
दीप प्रभामणि भ्रांति विसंवादी भ्रम स्मृतः मणि प्रभामणि भ्रांति संवादी भ्रम उच्यते. Mistaking the gleam of a lamp for a gem is called a vishamvadi brahma, a misleading error, or an error that does not lead to the goal. Mistaking the gleam of a gem for a gem is called a leading or informative error, though both are errors or wrong observations.
So I'm not quite sure why he means mistaking the gem for a gem is misleading. Let's go on and figure out what he's saying with that.
Bashpam dhoomataya buddhva tatrangaranumanutah varne yadrishya labdha sa samvadi brahmomatah. On seeing a mist and mistaking it for smoke, if a man argues the existence of fire there and goes for getting charcoal and accidentally finds it, his mistake is called a leading error, a chance coincidence.
Yes. So I mistake fog for smoke. That's a misleading error. But if I go find charcoal or wood there, that's just good luck, a happenstance. Going on.
Godavaryutakam gango dakam matva vishuddhyate samprokshya shuddhimapnoti sa sanvadi brahmomatah. Sprinkling on himself the water of the river Godavari, thinking it to be that of the river Ganges, if a man is actually purified, this is leading error, samvadi brahma.
So I'm not sure if someone thinks that holy water isn't, they think it's holy water when it's not holy water. Does it purify them? It's to say. Does just as much, but let's see what his point is.
Jware napta sannipatam bhrantya narayanam smaran mrita swargam vapnoti sa samvadi brahmomatah. A man suffering from a high fever repeats Narayana in delirium and dies. He goes to heaven. This is again a leading error.
Yes. So if a person in his delirium chants a mantra, he gets the punya, the merit of that mantra, even though he was in delirium when he does it. Okay, next one.
प्रत्यक्षस्यानुमानस्य तथा शास्त्रस्य गोचरे उक्तन्यायेन संवादी भ्रमा सन्ति हि कोटिशः. In direct perception, in inference, and in the application of scriptural authority, there are innumerable instances of such leading errors or chance coincidences.
So we have all sorts of things in the scriptures which are not necessarily literalistically true, but they can lead us to a truth. Or maybe even some that are contradictory. So, for example, in Mundaka Upanishad, in the prior kanda that we studied, we talked about how the scripture says the world proceeds from Brahman, the way the silk proceeds from the spider, the way the hair proceeds from the head, the way a sprout proceeds from the earth. Later on, Vedanta says, actually, no, nothing is ever really created or manifested. It's just imagined. Nothing really emerges from Brahman. But it's a useful metaphor, it's a useful leading error because it leads us into a deeper understanding. Or to put it in modern language, I had a student who talked about mithya. So we have that famous statement, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, Brahman alone is real. The Jagat, the creation, is mithya. And he said, conditioned reality. Actually, the word mithya means illusion, a lie. But he had a teacher who told him it's conditioned reality. Clay, In one condition is a vase, in another condition it's a bowl, in another condition it's a cup. It's useful. But does Brahman really get conditioned? Does Brahman really take different shapes? Vedanta would say, does your mind take real shapes in a dream? If you dream about a horse, and you wake up in the morning, there's no horse head in bed with you. It's not real. But these are teachings in the scriptures which gradually lead us to a higher truth. Of course, there's the teaching about reincarnation. Does a person really reincarnate? Depends on how you look at it. Vedanta thunders the doctrine of ajati. The self is never born. It undergoes no change. It does not die. Or as Swamiji used to say, reincarnation is the genealogy of the ghost and the ghost. As long as I think the ghost is real, then I can look at things like reincarnation or astrology, etc. But when I see there's nothing really there, it was imagined, then I've gone beyond that leading teaching. Next verse. Are you guys still online? I'm seeing funny things on the machine.
Yeah, we're here.
We're here.
I only see two little boxes. It's very weird. Oh well.
Anyatha Nritikadaru Shilasyu Devata Katham Agnit Dhiyopasya Katham Va Yoshidayadaha. Otherwise, how could images of clay, wood, and stone be worshipped as deities, or how could a woman be worshipped as fire?
Yes. So we have things like the various murtis or a Shiva Lingam, and we attribute qualities of divinity to the Shiva Lingam or the statue of Lord Shiva. And I think the reference he's making to is the temple Jwalamukhi. Anybody ever been to that temple? It's in the foothills of the Himalayas. It's a Devi temple, and what it is, there's a pool, and there's methane gas that comes up, and then they light it. So the pool has fire in it, and it's a temple to the goddess, a woman worshipped as fire. Next verse.
Ayatha Vastu Vijnanat Phalam Labhyata Ipsitam Kakata Liyata Soyam Samvadi Brahma Uchyate. From the knowledge and or adoption of a wrong means, sometimes by accident, as in the sitting of a crow on the branch of a palm tree, and in the instantaneous fall of a fruit thereof, a desired result is obtained. This knowledge and or adoption of a wrong means is called a samvadi brahma, or a leading error, or an error leading to a right knowledge.
Yes. So sometimes we will do a practice in the spiritual life, and we do get a beneficent result. I think a good example is Ramana Maharshi. So one of his dear friends at school dies. And then all of a sudden, he is stricken with this incredible fear of dying at 15, 16. Then he goes home because of this, lies down on the floor, and tries to act out being dead. He gets very stiff, like rigor mortis is set in. And then starts to contemplate who dies, what dies. And within a very short period of time, goes into samadhi, has a very deep realization of the self. So the leading means there for him was dealing with the grief of the death of his friend, which led him accidentally to self-realization. There's the story of Marpa and Milarepa in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, where I forget which one's the teacher. Do either of you remember?
Marpa's the teacher, I think.
And Milarepa's the student. So Marpa at one point takes off his sandal and smacks him across the face. Stopped his mind. That was his means, but it led to his enlightenment. Next verse.
Swayam brahmopi sanvadi yatha samyak phalapradah brahma tattvo pasanapi tatha mukti phalaprada. The leading error, though a wrong notion is potent enough to give the correct result. The leading error, though a wrong notion, is potent enough to give the correct result. So also the meditation or worship of Brahman leads to liberation.
Yes. So it is of value to worship God with a form. It is of value to worship your idea of God, even if it's the formless Brahman. So understand, it is not that which you worship here. That's what the Upanishad says. But that's a useful place to start. So here's a true story. There was a Catholic priest in the 60s by the name of William Johnston, who is known for my favorite translation of a very famous book called The Cloud of Unknowing. And he was one of the first of the Christian priests, most of whom were Jesuits, who began to explore Zen Buddhism. In fact, Johnston wrote a fine book called Christian Zen. But he talks about taking a Zen sesshin. That's a meditation retreat in the Zen tradition. And he was going to what they call dokusan, which is the interview with the Roshi. So he asks the Roshi, the Roshi asks him, well, how's your meditation going? And he says, well, I'm having a lot of difficulty sitting on the south. And the Roshi says, don't worry about it. Sit in a chair, sit in a chair. But how about your meditation? So Johnston says, well, I'm using the technique from the cloud of unknowing. I place a cloud of forgetting between me and the world, and a cloud of unknowing between me and God. And I'm endeavoring to pierce that cloud with the arrow of my love. This is almost verbatim of what the cloud of unknowing says. And the Roshi says, good, good, good. Keep at it. Pretty soon your God will disappear. Joseph goes, do you argue with the Roshi? He says, pardon me, sir, but I thought what was supposed to happen is I would disappear. And the Roshi says, yes, yes, it's the same thing. So when the mind stops, your personal God and your person both disappear. But something remains, which is always experienced as the subject of. So we do not dissuade people from worshiping God with a form. In Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks the Lord, which is better, worshiping the Lord with a form, worshiping the Lord without a form? Jnana Yoga. And Krishna's answer is an interesting one. He says, both will lead you to the infinite. But worshiping the Lord as formless is difficult for the embodied. And when he says embodied, he means those ego identified with the body. For them, it is better, it's easier to worship the Lord with a form. In the end, the God that you worship as an object is not real, but neither is the individuality. So Swamiji used to say your ego, a personal God is as real as your ego. I would nuance that. A personal God is as real as your body, mind, intellect. There is a God that rules the universe, whose nature is love, who will save us if we surrender to him. And that is especially important if we are identified with the body, mind, intellect. But in the deepest meditation, both the personal sense of self and the personal God disappear. All right, next one.
वेदान्तेभ्यो भ्रमतत्त्वं खण्डैकरसात्मकं परोक्षं वगम्यैतत् अहं स्मितयुपासते. After indirectly knowing the one indivisible homogeneous Brahman from the books on Vedanta, one should meditate on or think repeatedly, I am Brahman.
Yes, so paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge, is when I become convinced Brahman is. So here he's saying we have jnana abhyasa, the practice of knowledge. I start with this meditation, I am Brahman. Practically speaking, what does that mean? What is Brahman? Brahman is consciousness, being, existence, this absolute. It's always the subjects, not the body, not the prana, not the mind, not the intellect. Who is it who's doing this discrimination? It's the Chidabhasa, it's the ego sense that's practicing. No problem. meditate on it, practice it. And this is known as paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge. Jnana abhyasa, the practice of knowledge. Going on.
Pratyak vyaktin anulikhya शास्त्राद् विष्णवादिमूर्तिवत् अस्ति ब्रह्मेति सामान्य ज्ञानं मत्र परोक्षधीः. Without realizing Brahman to be one's own self, the general knowledge of him derived through the study of the scriptures, that is, Brahman is here called indirect knowledge, just as our knowledge of the forms of Vishnu, etc., is called.
Yes. So you can read various books about the various gods, not just Vishnu, it can be Shiva, it can be Ayyappa, it can be any other deity, it can be Jesus, etc. Or we can learn about what is the nature of Brahman from scriptures. Sat Chit Ananda. Brahman is pure existence, pure consciousness, bliss absolute. We can learn that it's the ground of being of the whole universe. Many, many passages in scriptures describe Brahman. This is indirect knowledge, Brahman is. We can even meditate on the Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. Well, I sure don't feel it. I feel like I'm a worm, a pretty miserable creature who's having problems in my family and problems at work and problems with a visa, yada, 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 yada. But I have faith that the truth is the self is Brahman. Even though I don't experience it yet. That's called paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge. Going on.
Chaturbhuja adhyavaga vapi murtim anulikhana akshay paroksha jnanyeva na tada Vishnu mikshate. One may have knowledge of Vishnu from scriptures as having four arms, etc. But if one does not have a vision of him, he is said to have only indirect knowledge, inasmuch as he has not seen him with his eyes.
Yes. So if you don't have a mystic vision of Lord Vishnu, that's different than just reading about his qualities. Going on.
Parokshatvaparadhena bhavena tattvavedanam pramanenaiva shastrena sattvam murte vibhasanat. This knowledge, because of its defect of indirectness, is not false, for the true form of Vishnu has been revealed by the scriptures, which are authoritative.
Yeah. So the scriptures say what the form of Vishnu is, even though you have not directly apprehended it. This is what the scriptures say, so it is still true. So the scriptures say, I am Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. That may not be my direct experience, but that doesn't mean it's not true. Even though I don't experience it yet, it leads me to a truth. Going on.
Satchidanandarupasya shastrat bhanepyanulikhan pratyancham sakshinam tattu brahma sakshana vikshyate. From the scripture, a man may have a conception of Brahman as existence, consciousness, and bliss, but he cannot have a direct knowledge of Brahman unless Brahman is cognized as the inner witness in his own personality.
Yes. So, this is an error that many of us make. We can talk about Brahman as an idea. Brahman has these qualities. We can even talk about the self having various qualities. The self is birthless, changeless, and deathless. But that's just an idea. Practice must start with our direct experience. This is the difference between paroksha jnanam, indirect knowledge, and aparoksha jnanam, direct experience. This is a water glass. Who sees the water glass? When I use the pronoun I, you refer to yourself. Who sees the water glass? I do. That's yourself. Effective sadhana starts with that direct experience. But Jim, I don't feel like Brahman. I feel like a miserable creature. I know that. But it does us little good to think of the self as some external idea. You start with your direct experience. I mean, then we start modes of inquiry. How do you know you were you? Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Wasn't a meditator. Because if he stopped thinking, maybe he'd disappear. But how do you know you are you? You do not see, hear, taste, touch, or smell yourself. You are not a feeling. You're not an emotion. You're not a thought. You can have thoughts about yourself. Tall, I'm short, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm male, I'm female, I'm successful, I'm a failure. But that's not the direct experience of I. How do you know you are you? You are not unknown. Yet you do not know yourself with the known means of knowledge. Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, feeling, and thinking. How is it that the self is both unknown and known? Look. So you start with aparoksha jnana, the direct experience. I'm me, okay. Now, in a very still mind, let's start inquiry into that direct experience, which is different than reading the scriptures that says the self is birthless and changeless. The self has no qualities or characteristics. These can be useful. Quiet mind, you read those things about the self. Then you turn the attention inward and see whether or not it's true about you. This is where he's taking us. All right, next verse.
Are we on 19? I lost track.
I think so, yes.
शास्त्रोक्तेनैव मार्गेण सच्चिदानन्दनिश्चयात् परोक्षम् अपि तज्ज्ञानं तत्त्वज्ञानं न तु भ्रमः. As the knowledge of Satchit Ananda has been acquired in the scriptural method, it, though an indirect knowledge, is not an illusory one.
So even though it's an illusion, my idea that Brahman is Satchidananda is just that. It's an idea. But it is truth. It just isn't my direct experience yet. That's his point. Going on.
Brahma yadhyapi shastreshu pratyakत्वेनैव वर्णितं महावाक्यैस्तथाप्येतत् दुर्बोधमविचारिणः. Though Brahman has been described as being one's own self in the scriptures and the great sayings, still one cannot understand it without the practice of inquiry.
Yes. So just reading the scriptural statement, this self is Brahman, or you are that. We still can have all sorts of wrong ideas. Yes, I am Brahman, meaning I'm a godly person. I've got powers. Don't get in my way, I'm going to strike you down. No, it doesn't mean that. Doesn't mean that at all. Oh, yes, I am Brahman. It means my personality is perfect. So you might as well worship me now. Doesn't mean that either. Those are wrong ideas about the scriptural statement. So we must engage in the proper inquiry into the nature of the self. Going on.
देहाध्यात्मत्वविभ्रान्तौ जागृत्यां न हठात् पुमान् ब्रह्मात् मत्वेन विज्ञातुं क्षमते मन्दधीवतः. As long as the delusion that the body is the self is strong in a man of dull intellect, he is not able to at once know Brahman as the self.
Yes. So here he identifies the major error. It is called Deha Vasana, the strong impression that I am the body. It's also called the Bija Vasana. Bija means a seed. It is the root of all of our other ego structures. So as long as I'm convinced I'm the body, even though that's not my direct experience, my direct experience is I know the body. The body is an object of cognition. But because of delusion and illusion, I'm convinced the body is who I am. From it stems all of the problems. We can call it the Mula Vasana, the root vasana. It's the most challenging, the most difficult to break asunder. Any thoughts on this? Next one.
ब्रह्ममात्रं सुविज्ञेयं श्रद्धालो शास्त्रदर्शिनः अपरोक्ष द्वैतबुद्धि परोक्षाद्वैतबुद्धैर्नूत्. As the perception of duality is not opposed to an indirect knowledge of non-duality, a woman of faith, expert in the scriptures, can easily have that indirect knowledge of Brahman.
Yes. So if I have indirect knowledge of the scripture, of the reality, meaning I think I'm my body, I can have knowledge of the scriptures, which are true, but still do not have direct knowledge that I am Brahman. We call a person like that a pundit. What's the difference between a pundit and a jnani? A pundit is a scholar. Probably the closest English word we have it is professor. It's not a negative term at all. Back in Indian history, when during the movement for independence, what was the title they used to call Nehru? Panditji. It's not negative. It's not negative. If I go up to Cal and you studied Sanskrit with Robert and Sally Goldman, they're very well versed in that scripture, the Ramayana. They've done a world-class commentary. They are pundits, excellent scholars. A jnani is one who has aparoksha jnana, aparoksha vidya, direct experience. They may not have any knowledge of the scriptures. They may have come to it by simply loving the Guru, the Sargadatta Maharaj. His Guru said, "You are Brahman, meditate on that." Okay. That's what he did. He didn't study all these dusty old books. Any thoughts on this distinction? In Vivekachudamani, Shankara says, without knowledge of the self, study of the scriptures is futile. With knowledge of the self, study of the scriptures is again futile. You have no knowledge of the self and you're studying the scriptures on your own, you're likely to get caught up in all sorts of confusion and wrong ideas. If you have knowledge of the self, you have become an Upanishad. So, what is the value of the scriptures? They are a setu, they are a bridge. They become the means by which a woman of wisdom passes this knowledge to a worthy student of this student. There are praman, means of knowledge that way. All right, going on.
अपरोक्ष शिला बुद्धिन् परोक्षे परोक्षे शतां नुदेत् प्रतिमादिषु विष्णुत्वे को वा विप्रतिपद्यते. The perception of a stone image is not opposed to an indirect knowledge of the deity whom the image represents. Which devotee contradicts the idea of Vishnu in the image?
So if you see a stone idol of Vishnu, that doesn't contradict the form of the god. There's lots of layers here. The stone idol is not Vishnu. If you have a beatific vision of Vishnu, in the end, that isn't really who Vishnu is. Vishnu is yourself. Couple layers. Get there. When I see the Murti, the stone idol, doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong, but it is paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge. Next one.
अश्रद्धाला अश्रद्धालोरविश्वासो नोदाहरणमर्हति श्रद्धालोरेव सर्वत्र वैदिकेष्वाधिकारतः. The disbelief of those who have no faith need not be considered, for the believing alone are authorized to perform the Vedic actions.
Yes. So if I don't believe that these gods, these idols, and this stuff like that, it's all superstition. That is probably not helpful. And if you're of the priest class and it's your duty out of service to the community to do these various pujas and yajnas, you should have faith in what you're doing. Did you go to the last Krishna Das concert with us? I can't remember.
I did not know.
You did not. Krishna Das was telling stories about when he was with Neem Karoli Baba, and they had pujaris come to do pujas, and they were all dishonest. They would steal the alms. People would get really angry and upset. So Neem Karoli Baba asked Krishna Das, this white guy, to do the puja, even though he wasn't a Brahmin. Largely because he was a real yogi and an honest person. Just because someone's doing the puja doesn't mean they have real shraddha, real faith in it. It's not really effective if they have no faith. Some of these priests don't even understand the mantras they're chanting. In 2015, when I was in India, I went to Chinmaya Vibhuti, and I was watching some of the Chinmaya mission priests. One of the things Swami Tejo Mayananda instituted was a training program for pujaris who had to learn Sanskrit well. What a difference to see these pujaris performing ritual, first of all, with beautiful Sanskrit and with clear understanding and intention with what they were doing. It was so much more powerful than so many temples. Now, I didn't see it, but someone said they're training women to be pujaris too.
Yes.
They break. So what he's saying here is we need to have shraddha for these things to be efficacious for you and me when we are doing ritual, whatever be your mode of worship. Now, other scriptures talk about different levels of faith. The lowest level of faith is tamasic. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm doing it, and I'm doing it wrong. Then there's rajasic ritual. God, give me what I want. Then there's sattvic ritual. I do it because it's my duty and because of my love. That's what purifies the head. Okay, next one.
Ashwadvalo pravishwaso nodaharanamarhati. Oh, I think I did that. I'm sorry. Sakridaptopadeshena paroksha jnanamudbhavet Vishnu murtyapadesho hi namimamsama pekshate. An indirect knowledge of Brahman can arise even through a single instruction by a competent teacher. It is like the knowledge of the form of Vishnu, which does not depend on intellectual inquiry.
Yes. So, going back to Nisargadatta Maharaj, his teacher simply said, "You are Brahman, meditate on that." First, it was indirect. That's all he needed, that one instruction. And he hung on to it. That's all he needed. Swamiji used to say, you really only need two books, Bhagavad Gita and Viveka Chudamani. That is everything you need to know. All the rest is different ways to say the same. Going on.
Karma pasti vicharyete anushthye ya vinirnayat bahushakha viprakinam nirnetu ka prabhunaraha. As there may be doubts about them, ritualistic works and methods of worship have been discussed in the scriptures. Who otherwise could have synthesized the directions about them, scattered as they are over many branches of the Vedas?
Yes. So, what's the right way to do which ritual? Oh, the knowledge is scattered throughout. Who's to say who's doing it correctly or incorrectly? Going on.
Ninir Tortha Kalpa Sutraiga Grathitasva Vatastikaha Vicharam Antarenapi Shakto Nushtanu Manjasa. Such rituals and methods of worship have been collected and coordinated in the Kalpa Sutras, With their help, man who has faith may practice them without further inquiry.
Yeah. So there's a particular text that tells you how to do all these rituals. You don't need to have massive knowledge of all four Vedas going on.
Upastinam anushtanam arshagranteshu varnitam vicharaksham amatyarcha tachrutve pasate guroho. The methods of worship are described in other works by the seers. Those who are dull of ratiocination go to a teacher and learn the methods from him.
So if you are dull, meaning your mind is not sattvic enough for the higher knowledge, you go to a teacher who instructs you in how to do worship. So who here has studied Tripura Rahasya? So remember what happens to Parashurama. He gets defeated by Lord Rama and he's dejected and he's walking along the road and he sees Samvarta and he's asked, how does all this come about? Samvarta gives him the truth and he goes, oh. Samvarta says, go talk to Dattatreya. He's down the road. So Parashurama goes down to see Dattatreya, asks the same question, and Dattatreya says, this dude has a mind like a brick. So what does he do? Who remembers what happens at that point?
Makes him worship for 12 years.
12 years he initiates him into the worship of the mother goddess. I am of a strong opinion that in fact is the Sri Vidya tradition. Highly ritualistic, lots of energy work, stuff like that. So then Parashurama does that practice for 12 years. At the end of which he says, oh, this gets me really high and I love it, but it's still transitory. And I have doubts. What was it that Samvarta said to me? I can't even remember it. I think I'll go back and see Dattatreya, find out about this. So he returns to Dattatreya, pranams, asks him these questions. Dattatreya says, finally, he scrubbed some of this dullness off. Now we can begin to give him the higher wisdom. So we do not criticize ritual, upasana, worship. And in fact, for some students, that's what we enjoin them to do. Will doing yoga poses enlighten you? No. But it's incredibly effective in purifying the gross and the subtle body. So for many people, it's highly effective. Is going to kirtan going to enlighten you? No. But chanting the name of the Lord opens the heart. It can help bring the mind into a sattvic state. So this is the point that Vidyaraj is talking about. Okay, what verse are we on for next time? We're going to end here tonight.
28.
Chapter 9, verse 28.
Actually, no, 29.
29 for next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om.